Welcome to the Azure Stack HCI show. Hi, Manfred. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sven. I'm fine, and I'm looking forward to our show today.
Yes, so this show will be about the announcements of Azure Stack HCI at Ignite last week. I think it was last week.
It
It
was
seems
last week.
long ago. It
There
seems
were
long
so many
ago because
announcements, and we had already had so many topics we talked about that it feels longer, but it was last week.
yeah, exactly. So last week, Friday, we already met and we did 5 short recordings about every single announcement or the most relevant announcements about Azure Stack HCI so far. And if you want to watch these videos, you're very welcome. You will find those on the Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk YouTube channel. And to get all the relevant updates, please follow us on the Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk LinkedIn. And on this YouTube channel on December 11th, you will see a session I will held with Thomas Maurer and Thomas Röttinger. We will talk about the strategy, the future of Azure Stack HCI, and all the impacts of the Azure Stack HCI announcements and the Windows Server v Next announcements. And if you can't wait so long to get all the news about Azure Stack HCI, for our German-speaking friends next week on Wednesday and Thursday in Würzburg, there's the hybrid conference. And if you want to participate, you can find the link manfred.helber, manfredhelber.de/hybrid-conference. So you can register and maybe we will meet in person next week. Yeah, this is what we had to announce at the beginning of this session. And today we will dive a little bit deeper into our first topic, the cloud-based deployment. Over the next coming weeks, we will have some more insights, some demos about all the announcements. And today we start with the cloud-based deployment. So let's start with a short explanation what cloud-based deployment is, and then let's have a look into the demo.
In the past, in Azure Stack HCI 2020 H2 and before, we had different deployment options. There were customers that preferred to do it via PowerShell. There were customers that preferred to build a cluster traditionally with the Windows Server failover cluster manager and then configure storage spaces direct. We had a wizard in Windows Admin Center, and these were different ways. We could use System Center Virtual Machine Manager in the past to deploy the cluster. And in 23 H2, which is today a preview of the next version of Azure Stack HCI, we have a single central optimized deployment experience, which is provided via the Azure portal. So this is completely new. It was not possible to deploy via the Azure portal in the past. And it's the only recommended way. So if you would try to deploy it via PowerShell, it would still be possible to build a cluster with 23H2. But this is a question that would be interesting for Thomas Röttinger, who is responsible for this part. Based on my understanding, it's not intended that we still build the cluster on our own because many additional hybrid components are configured via this deployment. So based on my understanding, the only way that will be supported is this cloud-based deployment. And this is where we want to have a detailed look today on.
Yeah, and this makes a lot of sense. And I had some calls over the last couple of days, and people asked me about why this new kind of deployment and so on. And from my perspective, it's very simple to answer, because in the past, you need a lot of skills to create the cluster and do all the networking and so on, and then connect the final solution to Azure. Now, with the new release of Azure Stack HCI, you do not need so many skills in the IT room, in the offices. So think about hundreds of sites. You have to deliver the hardware. You have to start the solution, connect it to the internet. So the pre-configured Azure Stack HCI is already on the hardware, and then you connect it to Azure via the Azure Arc. And then the rest can be managed centralized. So all the know-how about how to manage and to build the Azure Stack HCI environment can be centralized somewhere in the world and does not need to be on-site. And this is one of the benefits. And then I get the question about what is the benefit of Azure Stack HCI compared with Windows Server vNext? And I had a session with Kenny Lowe from Dell this week, and he said, and I think that's absolutely correct, that Windows Server, with all the new functionalities that are sometimes very similar to Azure Stack HCI, is a solution for do-it-yourself. So if you want to create your solution on premises and you want to decide for every single switch what to do and what not to do, then Windows Server could be your solution. If you want to have a streamlined, centralized solution that is more or less the same side by side, customer by customer, so that you are able as a managed service provider or as an IT administrator in a huge, large company, then it's super interesting that all the nodes, all the clusters are following a kind of best practice. And this is happening with 23H2.
Yeah, and there's another aspect about this, because we need so many skills. We need it, as you described, for Windows Server. When we think for the partners or at the partners, they need the skills for other virtualization platforms. They need it for maybe Linux and so on. And most of them already have skills for Azure. So many of them already know how Azure works. They know the Azure portal, they know the Azure Resource Manager. And when you think about a person like Eric, for example, you had a live stream with him this week also. Eric is a full Azure person that knows, I would say, everything in Azure. And if he could use this knowledge for an on-premises server, this would not be a showstopper to use this on-premises server. And with Azure Stack HCI, we can take this experience for deploying the cluster, for managing VMs, for deploying containers, because where we in the past said Azure Stack HCI is an extension for Azure, this is correct, but it was docked onto Azure. There were some connections made. Today, in the version 23H2, it's really part of Azure. Through this deep integration, we will see in the deployment in the next half hour, yes.
Cool. So I guess you prepared some visuals.
Yes, the deployment, usually we really have live demos here. The deployment takes too long to put it into 1 hour. So this is the reason why I took screenshots from the full deployment experience. So we will see every step, but we don't look live on it. And it would be possible to create a video of this, but it's not possible to stop the deployment and continue it, because it's a hybrid deployment. So I cannot stop Azure in what Azure does. I cannot create a snapshot in Azure. So when I start with the deployment, it has to go continuously on. And this is the reason why I took screenshots. So sorry for this, yeah, let's say limited live demo experience today, but I think we will see every relevant step. The deployment starts with the download of Azure Stack HCI. This is the first step, and it's done via the Azure portal. What you see here is exactly what you see when you go to the Azure portal, and maybe you have already Azure Stack HCI in your favorites, or you can use the search bar to search for Azure Stack HCI. You can only type Azure Stack HCI, and then you will see this page. The interesting thing is, this is part of Azure Arc. So half a year ago, when we looked at the portal, there was an own Azure Stack HCI blade. Now this is integrated in Azure Arc because it starts with Azure Arc. We will see this in a few minutes. So we download the Azure Stack HCI operating system here. When we click on download here, we can download Azure Stack HCI 2020 H2. This is the actual supported version. There we have the old deployment experience. We will not focus on it. The other option is to download Azure Stack HCI 23H2. This is a preview today, and this is what we will have a look on today. So we click on download the 23H2. It's about 4 gigabytes of ISO file size. When Azure Stack HCI 23H2 is released, you will find the pre-installation of this OS version on the integrated system nodes and the Premier solution nodes. In the validated nodes, it depends on your hardware partner. You can ask if they can pre-install it, but in the integrated systems and the Premier solutions, it is per definition part of the solution that the OS is pre-installed. What's important to know, you should put away your knowledge from the old deployment experience and ensure that you get all the steps that are necessary for the new deployment, because a new thing for the deployment for Azure Stack HCI 23H2 is that the Active Directory domain has to be prepared. So what we see on this screenshot are the steps that I execute on a domain controller directly or on a machine where I connect remotely to the domain controller. The first step is that we need to install some modules for the pre-creation tool, how it's called. Then we need a root key, and then we create an substructure in Active Directory, in the local Active Directory, to prepare this for Azure Stack HCI. As you can see here, my domain is mhdemolab.de. My cluster will have a name demo102 ASHCI CL01. I have a physical node list, and as you can see here, I will deploy a single node Azure Stack HCI cluster here. I think this is very interesting when you think about testing all the new stuff. And if you think about smaller customers, the experience in deployment is exactly for 2 nodes, 3 nodes, 4 nodes. There's no difference here. The steps are the same. But with each additional node, the deployment takes longer because it's a sequential workload. So we don't have the deployment in parallel. It is a sequential action. So each additional node extends the deployment time we will need. And here we can see we have a get credential, and this is important to understand. All the steps are described in the learn.microsoft.com documentation for deployment of Azure Stack HCI 23H2. But I think this point is not fully clear in the documentation. There's a note added, but you have to ensure not to miss this, because this username is asked for is a new user. When I first deployed it, I thought, okay, this has to be my local admin or my domain administrator. No, this is a new user that is created specially for the deployment. I decided to name this user HCI admin, and a password. The password has to meet the Azure complexity requirements, so minimum 12 characters and special characters and some numbers in there. So it's based on the Azure password policy. If you ask why do we need to prepare the Active Directory, there are several reasons. The first thing is a new organizational unit is created. And Microsoft has seen in the past many issues because customers have put their cluster nodes into the computers container, which is fine from the technical perspective. But if there are policies in the domain that are supplied or used on all machines in the domain, then also the computers organization unit will receive these policies. And when you think about security settings, software deployment policies, and things like this, this maybe is not suitable for the Azure Stack HCI nodes. And this is the reason why a new organization unit is created. You can specify the name. I specified the Azure Stack HCI cluster 01 organization unit, so OU. And in this OU, we have a computers container. Here we have created a computer account for each node and an account for the cluster object. And the interesting thing is the users, because here we have the security accounts for the whole deployment, for example, my HCI admin 01, and for all of the services that are running when the deployment has finished. And this is the reason why we were asked about the deployment prefix. This prefix we specify within the deployment script is used for each object that is created. This is by design best practice how you can do it. And in the past, this was your decision if you do this like this, or if you create manual accounts or different way. Now we have this mandatory deployment script, in my opinion, a good decision, because we need these objects anyway. And based on this deployment script, we can ensure that these objects are created accordingly to the requirements that are defined in the documentation for Azure Stack HCI 23H2. When the Active Directory is deployed and the nodes are installed today, and this is a previous situation, we have to install Hyper-V on the nodes manually. So they are at this point not Active Directory joined, so they are not in the local Active Directory. We install Hyper-V on them, and you remember the Azure Stack HCI OS is a server core installation, so it's a reduced graphical user interface, and this is the reason why we do it via PowerShell. When Hyper-V is installed, the server restarts, and then we have to connect this server to Azure. And it's not done via manual Arc registration like we can do it for Windows Server. There's a special installation package for Azure Arc on Azure Stack HCI 23H2. This is what we see in this screenshot here. Today in the preview, this is also a manual action in the deployment for the nodes. The nodes are still not in the local domain. They are only work group members. They have an IP address, the network communication works, but they are not joined to the domain, because the domain join is done within the deployment of the nodes. So when we have this screen on our nodes where we can see the Azure Arc resources are created, then we already can see in the Azure portal in our resource group we planned for Azure Stack HCI that there are the new node objects. These are Azure Arc machines. We have the location where they are located. And when we have several nodes, we will have 2, 3, or 4 of these server entries here in the resource group in the Azure Data Center. And when we wait a while, usually this takes something like 5 minutes, we will see when we switch to the deployment details, to the extensions. So when we click onto the server here, for example, this one, and we go to the extensions of the server page, then we can see, okay, there's an Azure Lifecycle Manager, Device Management, and Telemetry and Diagnostics. So these are 3 extensions that are installed or deployed for this node or for each node to ensure that we have the full capability for the deployment. Telemetry and diagnostics is clear. We need this to get information about the status in the Azure portal. The device management is, I think, also clear. It handles the management of this specific node. And the lifecycle manager is the component that is responsible for the whole deployment process. But the lifecycle manager is again in charge when we think about updating of the nodes. Microsoft mentioned that already in the preview phase. We have a new version about every 2 weeks. So in somewhere next week, we should see the first update for Azure Stack HCI 23H2. This is visible in the Azure portal, and this is also deployed via the Lifecycle Manager. So the Lifecycle Manager is the component that is responsible for new deployment, for updates, and also when we add new nodes to the environment. So when this is ready, so the nodes have the agent, the extensions appear in the Azure portal, we can again search for Azure Stack HCI, and then we can choose the cluster deployment. And this is pretty new. This is a new button we have since last week, Wednesday. It appeared on Wednesday in the Azure portals. Before, we only had a link to a learn.microsoft document that described how the deployment works. So when you click on deploy cluster, you will see a new Azure blade. So these pages in the Azure portal, they are named blades. So this blade here, you have a subscription. When we have several subscriptions in our Azure environment, for sure we have to choose the subscription where we added these specific nodes. We have to select the resource group where we added the nodes, and we have to select the region. When this matches the resource group we pre-created, then we will see our Azure Stack HCI nodes at the bottom. This can be up to 16. The maximum size for an Azure Stack HCI cluster is 16 nodes. Here we see a single node deployment. This single node deployment is based on a virtual machine. I'm often asked about capabilities or possibilities to test Azure Stack HCI. And the easiest way today is to use a virtual machine. The virtual machine should have minimum 64 gigabytes of memory. It's possible to do it with less, but my recommendation would be 64 gigabytes because the Azure Arc resource bridge that is deployed needs some resources. It would be possible to deploy it with minimum, I would say, 24 gigabytes of memory, but I would recommend 64 gigabytes. The Key Vault is responsible for storing the keys that are used within the deployment for this Azure Stack HCI cluster. And the cluster as usually has a name. Here in this scenario, the cluster 01. And the key vault can be created here via this link, create a new key vault, then a new page opens. The key vault name that is recommended is the name of the cluster minus HCI KV for HCI key vault, but you can change this based on your preferences. When we click on create, this key vault is created, is automatically added into this section here for the key vault name. And then we can use the button validate selected servers. This validates the servers in the list. And here we have an important learning I also took from my first deployments. When we deployed clusters via failover cluster manager or Windows Admin Center, then we had situations where we have seen warnings and we could decide to continue with the cluster creation. Here, you should not have any warnings or any failures. Failures are clear. If you have a failure, you cannot continue. But when you have a warning here, you should also fix this. So possible warnings are, for example, that the validation realizes that you have a network configuration that is not suitable for Azure Stack HCI. The documentation says for 23H2 that today in the preview, we don't have support for DHCP servers, so for dynamic IP addresses. This means that there should not be any active DHCP server in the network while the deployment is running. So here at this point, you have to ensure that no DHCP server delivers any IP addresses or gateways or anything to these nodes here in the list. You can start your DHCP server when the deployment has finished. The documentation explicitly says this is a limitation we have in the preview. This will change because for sure your customers have DHCP servers. I expect for the final version of the deployment that the Azure Stack HCI nodes need fixed IP addresses, but the DHCP server can retain in the network. Today, we have to disable or to ensure that the nodes will not receive any IP addresses, not now and not later in the deployment, because this will block the deployment.
Cool. So in the past, you provided some videos how to create a single node cluster, dual node, 3 nodes, and so on. It was a little bit different. So now it looks like it doesn't make a difference if it's a single node or 16 nodes. The process is always the same.
It's always the same. The only difference is here that I see a different number of nodes in the list. The way how to start and also the single steps are absolutely the same, because the interesting thing is in the till the release, so when Azure Stack HCI 23H2 will be released, we have a similar wizard for adding nodes. So this wizard is not available today, so I don't know how it will look exactly, but the message is that new nodes will also be added via the Azure portal. And the whole cluster is already prepared in the deployment so that we have the ability to add new nodes. So when we look at the configuration and the networking here, everything is pre-configured to be ready for adding, here in this scenario, an additional node to the single node and the third node to the initially single node cluster and so on. And this is the reason why every cluster, independently from the number of nodes, is configured somehow identical from the steps. For sure, in a single node cluster, we have reduced complexity regarding the networking stuff in the back end, but this is handled by the script. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so when the validation is ready, so we have a green sign here for every machine, we can go next to the configuration. And the configuration first asks about if we have a new configuration or if we are using a template. This template thing is pretty cool because if you created one cluster for a customer, you could save this template and use it for the next customer and the customer after this and so on. And you only change maybe the IP addresses in the template and the server names. So you don't have to click through the whole wizard here again. You use this configuration file. It's a JSON file, but it's something like a text file. You have characters in there. You can edit it. You can search and replace values. And usually you will change the IP addresses and the names. We will see in the networking section that there are different network architectures. But if you try to ensure that you have similar network configurations at each customer site, you really can use the templates. Also cool, but not available today, are the quick start templates. They can be provided by the OEMs, so by the vendors of the integrated nodes, the Premier solutions, and also the validated nodes. And these quick start templates can have pre-configured deployment things for this specific nodes, maybe network settings, maybe storage settings, and so on. So I decided to have a new configuration. This was the first cluster in this environment, and I will go to the next step, click next for networking. In the networking, we have 4 options. We can group all traffic. This means all network interfaces will be combined in one configuration, and we have virtual adapters for management, for storage traffic, and for compute, so for our workload on this cluster. Important is that all the network interfaces have to be identical. We can decide to group management and compute traffic. This means that we have compute and management combined and storage in a dedicated configuration. This means we need minimum 4 network interfaces. The first option is possible with 2 interfaces. The second minimum needs 4. We can group compute and storage traffic. This means the management is dedicated. Also minimum 4 interfaces because for each traffic we need 2 interfaces to have a supported configuration. And group management and compute no storage does not mean that we don't have storage traffic. This only means that the storage traffic is not based on a network intent. These network intents are something like templates for the network configuration. So this means the Azure Stack HCI environment takes care about your configuration for the existing nodes and for new nodes. Okay, so you can choose your preferred configuration based on your environment and based on your hardware configuration. For sure, this is also a thing that has been decided based on the number of network interfaces you have. And then we can select the network interfaces in this server. So we can select the network interfaces by the network adapter name. We can specify the virtual LAN IDs, and we can additional network adapters that will be added to this configuration intent here. At the bottom, we specify the IP addresses, and here we need an IP address range of 6 IP addresses. So when you think about we are deploying a single node cluster, the question is why are 6 IP addresses required? The deployment for Azure Stack HCI 23H2 fully deploys the Azure Arc resource bridge in our environment. This means what we had to do in the past manually with a very complex deployment script now is part of this deployment and very easy. It's automatically there. So every Azure Stack HCI cluster in the future will have the Azure Arc resource bridge. And these are mainly the IP addresses, therefore, and some other configurations that are done via the deployment. Okay, in the next step, the management, you have to specify a name for your custom location. The name, it's based on the Azure naming requirements for sure, but you can decide what's the name for this custom location. This could be Würzburg or Munich or data center Würzburg or data center Munich. The default name is name of your cluster and some extension there. The custom location name, you should think about naming convention that is usable for you, because as you have the Microsoft Azure regions, North Europe, West Europe, Germany West, Germany Central, you will have this additional custom location. And so it should not be something cryptical. It should be clear which location is this. In my scenario, this is the custom location for this specific cluster name. This is the reason why I have the D102 minus and so on. For sure, we can change this completely if we want to have the custom locations based on the geographical location here. So when you think about a retail scenario where you have many stores, then the custom location could, for example, be the name of the store. Maybe you have several stores inside one city, then for sure, for example, Würzburg is not the best name for the custom location, but store A, store B, store C. So we can be sure later where we deploy the services in. A witness is needed depending on the number of nodes, but the deployment wizard always asks about the witness. This will be a Azure storage account. You can create it here. So it's again only a name. You can specify the name. I don't know why we have this question here, because we always should use local redundant storage. So the default value that is pre-selected is the correct option. And then we can create the storage witness. In the past, we had to do this manually. So we went to the Azure portal, created a storage account, then we went to Windows Admin Center and filled in the values. And this is now part of the deployment process. From the technical perspective, it would be possible to use Azure Stack HCI 23H2 also with a file share witness. This is still configurable. Recommendation would be to use a cloud witness from Azure. The cloud witness does not really create costs. So the costs are a few cents. So this is not really a showstopper here, I would say, the costs. Then we have the cloud witness. Yes. Then we have the domain name we have to specify again, our prefix we used, and the accounts we specified earlier. We need the local administrator on the nodes, and we need a deployment account. This is the deployment account that was created on the nodes themselves. Very cool is the part security configuration, because the default is to use security level recommended security settings. This was one of the announcements for Azure Stack HCI 23H2, that more than 300 security policies are implemented by default within the deployment. This means we have the Windows Defender credential guard, we have the application control, we have BitLocker for the OS volume, for the data volumes, we have signing for SMB traffic, we have SMB encryption for cluster traffic. We have option that maintains security default values. All these, or nearly all these things, were also possible to be configured with Azure Stack HCI 2020 H2, but here they are on by default. And this is very, very important when you look at the actual security impacts we have in the market nearly every day. Here we have the Azure security standards implemented on premises. To say it again, it's also possible with Windows Server, but 99% of the servers I see in the market, and these are also servers in enterprise companies, maybe have configured something like 30% of these capabilities. In Azure Stack HCI, we have then enabled 100% by default, so 100% secure based on what we have in the Azure data centers. And this is also a great additional value. If you as a partner or customer say, okay, I need security, but I don't have this security specialist in my company. I want to ensure that minimum the platform is configured on the best practices, then this is a great capability here. So I would recommend to use these recommended security settings. I did this in my deployment here also. Then the wizard provides the option to create the workload volumes and infrastructure volumes. It's recommended. It's recommended because we already discussed this in this introduction videos for Azure Stack HCI 23H2. Usually, I don't need to access the local servers directly anymore. So every administrative action, deployment of VMs, change of VM sizes, start VMs, shut down VMs, can be done via the Azure portal. And for me, usually it's not relevant what the name of the volumes is, what the configuration of the volumes is. For me, it's relevant that this works with the Azure portal. And when I use the default configuration, the recommended, then this is ensured by default. For sure, I can also create my unique own infrastructure, and I can use existing data drives. If you reinstall your Azure Stack HCI environment, then maybe you want to reuse your data drives where you already have a storage spaces direct pool on there, and this is also possible here. As for every Azure resource, we can specify tags. The tags can help us to group objects, to find objects, to filter objects. So these are additional values, for example, store parameters, for example, configuration information about the clusters, maybe warranty information. This can be added via the tags here. And when we have finished this, Azure Stack HCI starts with a validation. This is not correct. The Azure portal sends the configuration to the lifecycle controller on the nodes. they start with the validation and they send the status back to the Azure portal. And this takes a while. We have several steps, cluster resources, cluster permissions, and so on. This is all tested here. You should plan some time here, depending on the number of nodes, half an hour, maybe an hour. In this single node deployment based on a virtual machine, this was pretty fast, but I did a 4-node deployment this week. There we had something like an hour where we waited for the validation. If we have some errors here, we can click on the status. We can see on the right-hand side what has gone wrong. And when we fix the issue, we can try again. So we can use this validation till we have on every step a green success sign on it. And this is how it should look like. Then we have the success and we have these detailed steps. And for sure, we can view the reports, the details. This is like in the past, we could view the deployment or validation report of the Azure Stack HCI cluster. When this is finished successful, we can go to the next steps, review and create. In the review and create step, we will see again a list of all parameters. When we open a new tab at this point in time in the Azure portal, and when we look at the Azure Stack HCI list, then we will see this new cluster in the list of our Azure Stack HCI clusters, and we will see a validation success. We will not see that this cluster is connected like this here. The connected clusters are fully deployed and connected to Azure. This one here is successfully validated and ready for deployment. And when we continue on the previous step, when we say here, okay, now let's preview and create, and let's start the deployment, then the deployment starts on the nodes. It's handled by the Azure Resource Manager, so we can see inside our cluster object the deployments. First, the list is empty, then the deployment is added, and then we can see the single steps of the deployment on the right-hand side here. If we configure everything accordingly, all the steps will be successful. For sure, we also see the deploying of the Azure Stack HCI cluster in the portal. Here we can see it started at this time. The duration was already 8 minutes. And when I click to the details, I see exactly the step where the cluster is actually located. So we have several steps here in the list where we always see, was this step successful? How long took it? Here, for example, something like 25 minutes between these two steps. Then very fast followed steps. The join server of to Active Directory is done via this deployment and so on. And the full deployment time is a little bit depending on your internet connection, because the Azure Arc resource bridge has to be downloaded. The agents have to be downloaded. When you have a 4-node cluster with a very fast internet connection, you have something like 4 hours. The whole deployment will need, but it runs automatically. You don't have to sit in front of the screen and wait for it. You have to click to this point here where we have the confirmation of the steps, and then we click on preview and create, and then this deployment runs automatically. A 2-node cluster with a not so fast internet connection can also take up to 4 hours. A single node in a very fast connection needs something like 1.5 hours. But we always need time to provide this Azure Arc resource bridge. And this is the great thing, because when the deployment has finished, so when this new cluster is in the list of your systems, you are completely ready. In the past, when the deployment of the cluster was finished, you started in registering the cluster in Azure. You maybe started with deploying the preview of the Azure Arc resource bridge and so on. And this is now there. So it's already ready to run, the resource bridge is registered, and we can work with this cluster. I took some screenshots of this, but we can look also on the live system here. For example, I can go to the cluster in the Azure portal and decide to download some virtual machine images. This works in Azure Stack HCI 23H2 out of the box. So it seems that these are many, many steps. The official statement from Microsoft is that the preparation we have seen in this PowerShell windows at the beginning are related to the previous status. So this experience will change to make it more comfortable for the administrator at the system. The steps in the Azure portal seems to be much information we have to enter here, but if you try this on your own, you will realize this is less amount of work than you had to do in the previous Azure Stack HCI deployment. But now this is combined in one big wizard that does everything. In the past, we had to use the admin center, the Azure portal, register this and register this. So from the feeling here, you never had any deployment step that took 4 hours. But you had the situation when you added all the time you invested to reach this level here, you had to invest 2 or 3 days in the Azure Stack HCI 2020 H2 because the Azure Arc resource bridge itself took something like 4 hours when you did it with the scripts that Microsoft provided there. So in my opinion, this new way is exactly what we need, because I'm a big fan from wizards that not always stop and say, okay, Manfred, now I need some values, and then I work half an hour, and then I need some additional values, and then again half an hour. I prefer these wizards that collect everything from me, that enforce me to plan my environment. And then when I have all the data, I can click on deploy, and then everything runs automatically. And then it doesn't really matter if it takes 1 hour, 2 hours, or a whole day, because when it's finished, I can work with this environment.
That's cool. So in your demo, the single node already has been included in your Azure Arc. So do you have some deployment slides showing what has to be done when you unpack your node and register first time to Azure Arc? Is this simplified as well, or is the process
This
more or less
is
the same as
this is
before?
this step. What maybe I didn't explain it yeah, clearly. So this step shows the registration on
Okay.
the node. So this is the output. Let's have a view on the input. So this is the output screenshot. The input is this here. It's described in the learn.microsoft.com. So these are the PowerShell steps you execute before you see the screen we had in the screenshot. So this is exactly the registration step here. And I didn't have this in my screenshot explicitly because it works as described in the Learn module. And Microsoft says this will change. Though this is temporary, that we need these steps. I don't know how this will change exactly, but we have to import several modules. Here we could imagine that these modules are maybe installed via some automated update process. When the node first connects to the internet, this would be possible, because I also could this do via something like an auto run script or something like this. And then we have the modules. We have an invoke Azure Stack HCI Arc installation. And this step, when we execute this line here, we exactly see this output here. This takes about 5 to 15 minutes for each node, and then the node appears in the Azure portal in Azure Arc. Yeah. And when we have a look
server,
at
they announced that there will be a connect to Azure Arc button, and the rest is more or less automated, but it's not possible with Azure Stack HCI because there's no graphical user interface, correct?
This is partially correct, but my expectation is that we will see something like this wizard, because this wizard would be executable also on Azure Stack HCI, because on Azure Stack HCI, we, for example, can start Notepad. So I'm using Notepad regular on my Azure Stack HCI clusters. So when I go to this node, we have seen the deployment. For sure, the node looks like this. So limited graphical user interface, only here the console. But for sure, I can use a notepad here, and then I have some graphic components. When I use servers from hardware vendors, I'm installing the drivers via consoles like this, and they are also graphical. So it would be, from the technical perspective, no problem to provide such an Arc registration agent with 3 or 5 steps with a graphical user interface that replaces these steps here that are not so comfortable, but they work very well. But it would be easier to have a wizard like we have it in Windows Server vNext, like it was announced at Ignite, and like it already works today. But when we would use exactly this wizard, I'm sure I can copy it from Windows Server to Azure Stack HCI. But this wizard is the Arc registration for Windows Server. And the Arc registration for Azure Stack HCI is different. So even if I would be able to copy this existing wizard, it would not be suitable to do the Arc registration. But this is my expectation, that we will have something like this wizard in Azure Stack HCI, yeah. Or maybe even easier, yeah.
Okay, so one last question is for the cloud-based deployment.
Yeah.
If Azure Stack HCI OS is pre-installed on the node, does it make any difference only for the deployment if it's a validated, an integrated, or a premier solution node?
Regarding the technical perspective, if I'm thinking about the nodes are registered in Azure. So maybe this could be easier in the integrated nodes, because the integrated node vendor could provide some additional scripts on their nodes. Yeah? But if we think about the nodes are registered in the resource group, and let's have a short look at this. For example, here in a resource group, which one did I take? For example, oh, it was a D01, I think so, D10, the Azure Stack HCI cluster. These are the objects that are registered here in this resource group in the Azure portal that are needed for Azure Stack HCI. And if we expect that this node is already there, then the deployment is absolutely identical if we have a validated node, an integrated system, or a Premium solution. But what is already announced for the Premier solution, and I think also for the integrated systems, is that within this deployment, I would expect this somewhere at this validation step, that it will be possible to also test for missing drivers and firmwares on the nodes. So there might be extensions in the near future for integrated systems and validated nodes. Today, there is no difference. Today, there is no difference if I deploy a validated node or an integrated system or a Premier solution-based hardware with this wizard like we have it today in the preview. Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you, Manfred, for sharing all your insights. I'm looking forward to the next session, and the next session will be today in 2 weeks, December the 8th. And then I think we will talk about management, don't we?
Yes, this is the plan, because now we deployed the cluster. Next time, a real life demo, because management works very, very well and we don't have this long times to wait. We have some time. We have to wait for downloading the ISOs for new deployments, but I can pre-download some of the ISOs. And so we will have a full live demo for the VM management via Azure Arc on Azure Stack HCI 23H2. So very similar to what we did 2 weeks ago, but 2 weeks ago we did it with the resource bridge for 2020 H2, so the old version, and in 2 weeks we've seen the new stuff.
That's cool. So now it's time to say goodbye to our international friends as always, and then we are switching to German language because we have some more offerings for our German friends. So goodbye to the international ones and hello German ones. So we have the hybrid show. Wie immer, heute am Tag der Azure Stack HCI Show um 14 Uhr mit dem Erik Berg, mit dem ich ja gestern schon eine Session
Mhm.
gemacht habe zum Thema News rund um Windows Server 2025 wird es ja wahrscheinlich heißen. Offiziell heißt es noch wie Next.
Mhm.
Und hier ist jetzt in der Hybrid Show heute Nachmittag um News von der Ignite. Der Erik hatte ja gesagt, das wird auf der einen Seite klar um HCI auch ein bisschen gehen, aber auch ganz viel um Azure Arc. Und da gab es dann gestern auch schon Anfragen, wo man das schauen kann. Also das kann man auf jeden Fall schauen bei Manfred Helber auf dem YouTube-Channel. Da gibt es dann die Hybrid Show heute um 14 Uhr. Dann haben wir noch die Azure Arc Show, die ist am 18. Dezember, ist also noch 4 Wochen gut hin. 16 Uhr, da wird es vermutlich mal um jede Menge News auch zum Thema Azure Arc gehen. Ansonsten wäre es ja nicht die Azure Arc Show, dann mit dem Manfred und dem Alexander. Der Alexander ist übrigens auch nächste Woche in Würzburg dabei bei dem Hybrid Cloud Conference Event. Also wenn ihr da auch vor Ort seid, trefft ihr nicht nur Manfred und mich, sondern eben auch den Alexander. Ansonsten ist der Manfred auch nächsten Montag wieder dabei, und zwar am 27.11. Da haben wir ja im November so ein bisschen die Themengruppe Copilot, Windows 11, was gibt's Neues von der Ignite? Und am Montag geht es halt ganz speziell um die News rund um Microsoft 365 und Azure. Und dann verabschieden wir uns quasi aus dem November und werden dann in der nächsten Sendung auch über den Dezember sprechen. Oder magst du schon grob erzählen, was im Dezember kommt?
Im Dezember geht es um Windows Server 2022 und Security. Also es geht um den integrierten Defender, überhaupt die Security Capabilities und dann die Defender Extension über Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Das Ganze auf Basis Windows Server 2022 und wird, glaube ich, ganz spannend.
Wunderbar. Ganz spannend ist natürlich auch immer der WBSC Support. Den gab es heute Morgen um 10, immer alle 14 Tage, 10 bis 11 Uhr, 60 Minuten für eure Fragen. Also was immer euch bewegt aus dem Microsoft-Universum, könnt ihr diese 60 Minuten nutzen, um die Fragen dann über den Chat live zu stellen. Heute kamen im Grunde wenig Fragen, aber jetzt sehe ich gerade, 2 sind doch vor ein paar Minuten noch reingekommen. Weiß nicht, ob
Mhm.
wir die schnell mal durchgehen wollen.
Das
Was
können wir
haben wir denn?
machen, ja.
So
Also beim
only
Thomas können
the
wir, glaube ich,
cluster.
deutschsprachig antworten, genau. So only let the cluster talk to Microsoft for license reasons is broken. You have to go to Windows Server if you do not want to allow Internet access to Azure Stack HCI. Also es ist weiterhin so, dass es von der Architektur her so ist, dass der Azure Stack HCI nur für die Abrechnung mit Azure zwingend reden muss. Meine VMs laufen weiter, mein ganzer Workload ist weiterhin da. Aber wenn du dir das mal anschaust, Thomas, wirst du feststellen, dass der große Mehrwert von Azure Stack HCI dadurch entsteht, dass wir das Azure-Portal fürs Management nutzen und dass wir letztendlich eine VM jetzt im Azure-Portal deployen können und 5 Minuten später auf dem Azure Stack HCI. Das ist der große Mehrwert und ich glaube, das wird aber jetzt einige Zeit kosten, das zu vermitteln, das auch wirklich jedem diese Experience zu geben, weil das muss man selber mal gefühlt haben. Wenn man das ausprobiert und sagt, das Azure-Portal, das will ich ja gar nicht nutzen. Ich habe da keinen Mehrwert. Mit Azure habe ich nichts am Hut. Ich habe noch nie was mit Azure Resource Manager gemacht. Ich weiß überhaupt nicht, was so ein JSON-File ist und ich will das auch nicht wissen und werde das nicht brauchen. Dann ist Azure Stack HCI eigentlich nicht die richtige Lösung, sondern es ist tatsächlich Windows Server 2025, wie du hier schreibst, oder Windows Server 2022 heute. Wenn wir aber das einsetzen, also Hyper-V, dann werden wir feststellen, Mensch, wir kriegen nicht diese Azure Experience. Wir haben zwar einen Hyper-V-Manager und so weiter, aber die Azure Experience haben wir nicht. Und wenn nun Azure Stack HCI heute über Failover Cluster Manager verwaltest, geht das. Ich habe das getestet, funktioniert wunderbar, aber es funktioniert genauso wie mit Hyper-V. Und dann fragt man sich natürlich, warum habe ich denn jetzt Azure Stack HCI? Das habe ich wegen der Mehrwerte aus dem Portal heraus, über die Zentralisierung, Monitoring und so weiter. Also mir macht das unheimlich viel Spaß, muss ich sagen, weil es eine sehr, sehr schöne Admin-Experience ist. Aber ja, muss man mal ausprobieren. Empfehle ich dir auch wirklich mal anzugucken, vielleicht mal in so einer Evaluationsumgebung. Und bei dem pair, I think there we should answer in English language if pair is
Yeah,
still
this one is
there.
about the upgrade path from
Yeah.
22 to 23, and at the moment there is no upgrade path. So Cosmos mentioned in his post that 23H2 has to be a new deployment, and in near future maybe there will come an upgrade path, but at the moment it's a new deployment for 23H2.
Yeah, but you mentioned you start your evaluation with the preview next week. And if you start with the preview 23H2, we don't have a guarantee that we can upgrade to the final version. But the plan is that it's possible. So there will be new versions published something like every 2 weeks. And the update experience via the Azure portal should already work there.
Gut, also Per hat noch geschrieben, er hat auch Deutsch
Ah.
verstanden. Von daher haben wir das auch gecovert. Jetzt sind wir an dem Punkt, wo wir noch mitteilen wollen, dass es grundsätzlich Sinn macht, uns auf LinkedIn zu folgen, also dem Manfred und mir und auch dem Erik Berg und dem Carsten Rachfall und Alexander Orter, wie sie alle heißen, weil wir permanent aus dem Microsoft-Infrastruktur-Thema etwas posten. Besonders aktiv sind natürlich hier Manfred und ich. Wir haben auch zum Thema Azure Stack HCI schon einen eigenen Kanal, aber grundsätzlich empfehlen wir uns einfach persönlich zu folgen, weil da passiert am meisten. Aber eben auch, wie am Anfang schon gesagt, zum Thema Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk gibt es auch einen LinkedIn-Channel und da bin ich gerade sehr aktiv. Also folgt uns einfach auch da. Wenn ihr auf YouTube diese Videos nicht verpassen wollt, dann folgt uns einfach auch dort, weil dann bekommt ihr proaktiv eine Meldung, wenn auf diesen Channels etwas passiert. Und die meisten Dinge passieren eben bei Manfred Helber auf seinem YouTube-Channel. Zum Beispiel die Dinge, die er mit Alexander macht, die er mit Erik macht, die sind bei ihm auf dem YouTube-Channel. Das, was wir zusammen machen, sind auf unser beider YouTube-Channels. Und das, was ich mache, ist auf jeden Fall auch auf meinem YouTube-Channel und Azure Stack HCI Tech Talk. Da sind wir auf YouTube-Channel immer dann, wenn es eben auch das Thema Azure Stack HCI betrifft und ich in irgendeiner Form involviert bin. Also jede Menge Kanäle, wo ihr Informationen finden könnt, jede Menge Kanäle, denen ihr folgen könnt. Und wenn ihr sagt, naja, ich möchte gar nicht so unbedingt was verpassen rund um den WBSC und um die Azure Stack HCI Show, dann könnt ihr euch den WBSC Kalender abonnieren. Dann integriert ihr den in euer Outlook. Da haben wir dann die manfredhelber.de/Kalender-Webseite. Dort findet ihr dann auf jeden Fall den Kalender bzw. die Anleitung, wie ihr ihn abonniert. Und wenn ihr statt Kalender Newsletter reinschreibt, könnt ihr auch einen klassischen Newsletter beantragen. So, somit sind wir am Ende der Sendung. Hat uns wieder mal sehr gefreut, also mich zumindest. Und wie immer gehören die letzten Worte dem Manfred. Ich sage schon mal Tschüss und wünsche ein schönes Wochenende.
Ja, das wünsche ich auch. Ein wunderschönes Wochenende und vielleicht sehen wir uns ja gleich in einer Stunde noch zur Hybrid Show mit dem Erik und dann auf jeden Fall am Montag zu den WBSC Skills und ja, vielleicht nächste Woche in Würzburg. Heute Morgen im WBSC Support haben schon einige gesagt, dass sie da sind. Da freue ich mich sehr, wenn wir uns wieder mal live sehen. Bis dahin, macht's gut. Tschüss.